Hi everyone, today we're going to go through a 1200 square meter co-working feasibility study. We're actually going to go through a simplified financial model, right? So this is going to be a single floor business. It's going to be an asset within Australia for today. Next week I'll do one in the US and the week after one in EMEA or London. You let me know which market you'd like to see. And rather than do my how-to scribbles, which you might know me for in my previous videos where we go through methodologies and calculations, I'll still do that, but I thought it would be valuable to actually pull up a model and walk you through it and just talk through it, right? Because I think it's really important for a lot of the entrepreneurs out there trying to start a co-working business to grasp this properly. Or a landlord or investor, know the language, know the model, so that when you negotiate or when you actually look into putting one into your building, you've got a pretty good foundation, right, to have those discussions. And even though we're going to be going through a simple dashboard, I'll drag this over. It's all fed in by a very detailed and thoughtful machine, right? Every cost line item, revenue, there's, formulas, there's calculations, there's lots of different considerations built in because it's a business at the end of the day. That's quite complicated, even though it just feels like you're re-renting space. So yeah, I just wanted you to understand that if you were serious about running this business, I think you need to move away from hypothetical forecasting. It's good that you're watching this video because we can jump into a bit of detail, but it really is important to get into the nitty-gritty and the nuts and bolts. And on that topic, I'll go back to this simplified dashboard. If you go into the description, you can either book me for a direct consult where we can speak about your particular asset and building. More than happy to run through that and look at options. Or I just launched a blueprint methodology report, which comes with a very simple financial model for you to tinker with, even a space calculator. So go check that out, and then you can decide whether your opportunity is worth, putting some more time and resources in before engaging anyone in relatively high ticket consulting in this market, right? So the report is meant to be a source of substance and transparency for you if you like my videos and like what I do. So jumping into the dashboard, let's start with the revenue. We'll go top to bottom, and it's a 5-year forecast. You can very easily extrapolate this out to 10-year forecast, which some owners might want to see, some valuers, because when you deal in commercial real estate, it's very long term. But come on, everyone, this is a business at the end of the day. Who knows what's going to happen in 10 years' time? It's all hogwash. So I like to just focus on a 5-year forecast. And the reality is if you want to extend it to a 10-year, just drag it across your spreadsheet, depending on how that's modeled, or if you grab one of my models. And the reality is because within a co-working business, you're striving for that 85% benchmark occupancy rate. The only real difference you're going to see is your escalations in terms of your revenue assumptions and your cost assumptions, right? So we're going to focus on the 5-year. I'm going to zoom in a little bit because we don't need to see the full 5 years. As long as we can see these line items clearly and we look at, the first couple of years, I think that's really important. Revenue is really broken up into 4 key channels. There's a 5th one, which is food and beverage, but I'll speak on that shortly. And there's a reason why it's zeroed here, okay? And if you've been following my videos or you've got a basic understanding of co-working, it's really broken into private office desks, your flexible open plan desks, your meeting and event spaces, and your ancillary revenue. And ancillary revenue is like, your virtual mailing, concierge services, your ability for members to register addresses there, so they may not even need a desk, they might just pay you for that service. More recently, I see content creation and branded marketing being an increased channel. Because when you think about it, your community of customers, even though it's finite, it's not like thousands and thousands out there, especially if you're setting up your first one, they're very engaged eyeballs, right? Which the correct brands would pay for. So as long as you don't abuse that trust, but you put, strategic products within your newsletters or in front of them, a sponsor will pay for that. You just need to think about things differently, right? So if we jump up into the private office desks, we've got some numbers here that I've pulled from the detail model just to help explain this. For a 1,200 square meter floor, we've assumed 128 private office desks and 32 flexible office desks, right? And the way we get those numbers is, I believe we divided, was it 12? So we got 1,200 divided by, I think it was a 7.5. Yeah, it's 7.5. So I'll write it here, 7 square meter workstation density assumption here. Now, normally you can get away with as low as 5. The bigger your space gets, as in, if you're at a 3,000, 4,000 square meter site, which I advise against in this market, we can get into it. You could divide that by 5 to see how many desks you've got ready to flog. And, that was prevalent and true maybe 3 to 5 years ago, especially with some of the larger operators like WeWork that had smaller desks and really wanted to optimize their dollars per square meter. However, in a post-COVID world and where spaciousness and experience triumphs, you're lucky to get away with 6. And with the smaller sites around the 1,200 and especially below the 1,000, 7.5 to 8 is probably realistically the number of workstations you're going to fit into that space. Because that 7.5 square meters, and I go into this detail in the report and everything in proper detail, it's not just how much space you have around the workstation. It's a market methodology for co-working operators when they know their product to understand, if I just look at a total floor plate, what number can I divide it by to understand how many desks I can sell, because it assumes that I'm putting in meeting spaces, a concierge, a clubhouse lounge, maybe, a cafe kiosk, some meeting spaces, an event space, blah, blah, blah. It's a very loose calculation for these pre-feasibility studies. Operators who have large brands and lots of sites, have that number because they've done so many. They know what that number is. For you, especially if you're a new person looking into this business, it's better to be on the conservative side. So for a 1,200 square meter site, we're going to use 7.5, which means you've got 160 desks. And then generally I like to break it up, not to 80-20, like the 160 ratioed 80% to private office desks, 20 to flexible desks. I generally go to an 85-15, maybe even a 90-10 if it's a CBD-centric site. But for this hypothetical, we're going to assume it's a bit removed for the central business district. It's a bit of a suburban fringe location, hence the smaller site, where there's a demand for these flexible desks in an open plan format. They don't want a private office just yet. Hence, you've got 32 of them in this floor plan. So we're going to sell those. And from a design perspective, it's nice also to have some of them within your floor plan because it allows it to breathe so it doesn't feel like an ant farm of desks, of offices, which you may have experienced when you've gone to some of these larger sites, right? When you look into year 1 and year 2, I've got a yellow line here of average private occupancy. This really explains why the revenue in year 1 is much less than year 2, because you're ramping up from, let's say you open the first month at 30% occupancy because you've done some pre-sales and pre-marketing. You want to open with something, so you've got revenue coming through the door to cover your costs. 30% is the target, 20% as you get bigger, right? And you get 12 months to hit an 85% occupancy, right? That means your average for the year is 58. That's generally how it works. And 85 is a good number. It's almost a market standard because it doesn't mean you shouldn't ever forecast for 100% because at the end of the day, your business is flexible. So you could lose customers tomorrow. You could lose them, sometimes depending on how you stagger your clientele or how you do the deal structures. I've seen sites that are cruising because majority of their clients sign 12 to 24 month licenses and deals. Some do really choppy month to month, 3 to 6 months. So it's almost like every other month they're like, oh, we're about to lose 15, 20% of our occupancy. How do we retain them? And then throw discounts at them, which means even though their occupancy is strong, their cash flow is weak, right? So you really got to stay on top of this kind of stuff. The private office desks, we're not going to go into in this video, but you've got your pricing assumptions, whether it's $700 or $800 a desk, whatever you find you want to price it at as a blended rate. Blended meaning so that you don't overcomplicate your first feasibility study by having lots of different prices of desks because you've got some with better views, some with better natural light, some that are in the central core of the floor plan, so not as attractive, so should be cheaper. Find a blended rate you're happy with. But whatever it is, you need to apply discounts in year 1 because you're ramping up. You want to fill it. So, I like to assume at least a 25% discount rate in year 1. And then year 2 onwards, at least a 10 to 15% because you're still going to be doing deals. In the world of co-working, if you do a deal 6 to 12 months at a time, you're expected to do some form of discount to get them through the door, right? So you've got to budget that in. I've seen many feasibility studies and business cases, even from large investors and landlords, not do that. And then they're scratching their heads after 2 years going, hey, why are we behind budget when we're actually higher in occupancy than what we forecasted? Well, it's because you forecasted that you were going to sell your desks with no discounts, whereas your team on the ground have had to be competitive. Right, because the guys next door or the girls up the street, they're selling it at a cheaper rate to steal your customers because they're lacking in occupancy. It's just the name of the game, right? Meeting and event spaces is an interesting one because I feel like this number may look large for some operators who may be watching this video who've done it before, but it's mainly because I feel like a lot of operators, unfortunately, are in a situation where they've given the meeting rooms away for free. So it's really hard to take it back, right? Whereas this is almost a channel that needs to be optimized within the flex and the co-working business to charge for it and to charge more. You shouldn't get too bullish when you forecast it because it's a per hour product offering, meaning when you sell your offices and your desks, you're at least selling them months or years at a time, right? Whereas meeting rooms, it's like per hour, right? So it's very seasonal. You could have a great week, you could have a really crappy week where no one uses it. So getting the right amount of meeting spaces within your space, so it's a supply-demand thing happening there, you don't oversupply or undersupply it and vice versa, is important. But then putting the right assumptions in there so you don't over-assume its utilization. Just a safe number to throw at you now if you're doing some modeling, or if you wanted to go into a rabbit hole with that with me, reach out. Just use 20 to 25% of how many hours within the week and the year that you could sell that meeting room, only commercialize 20 to 25% of it. And that helps you accommodate maybe the remaining, 75%, maybe 35% of it you give away for free, so you still maintain some form of free meeting room use for your members. And then the remaining percent is just, time that you're turning over the meeting room if it's required, or yucky times, like too early in the morning or late in the evening where it's not going to be booked, even though it could potentially physically be booked, or right after a public holiday or something like that, right? So use that. Ancillary revenue, this normally is a very healthy line item for established businesses, especially with mailing and registered addresses and virtual services. But as a new business, it's going to take time to grow and to really flex. So keep a conservative target in there and see how you can grow that number as you grow yourself. Now, food and beverage, I've put nothing in here, and I'll skip down to costs, food and beverage payroll costs, to help explain what I'm about to say. If you're doing a co-working cafe, you shouldn't expect any margin from it, right? It should almost be just leveraged as an experience enhancer for your space, so you can charge more for your desks and your meeting rooms. So when you look at your holistic business case, it could be better if you consider putting a cafe in that, because you're charging more for everything else. But the physical food and beverage business itself is probably going to lose money, if I'm going to be honest. And I've worked with many hotel operators, hospitality professionals in many of the sites, co-working sites I've designed, built, and operated, and brought them in as a partner. And even they couldn't make money off it, right? The only way you can really make money is if they've chuck in a commercial kitchen there, it's in a big building and they cater into the building. They don't just serve your co-working members. It's on the ground floor, so they can kind of figure out how to market it to the street traffic, to capture coffees for people walking past, all that kind of stuff. Not likely for your situation. So if you want to put one in there, a really easy consideration is a cafe kiosk, maybe one staff member to do it. Well, it has to be a staff, maybe only certain periods of time in the day as well, to keep costs lean and low where it's high traffic. And then don't even put it in your model. Just expect it to be cost neutral. And because when you look at the food and beverage costs, I've got some of the percentages here. This is even with a global hotel operator I worked with, and some of their assumptions when we modeled a lot of this stuff out. Payroll was 60% of the revenue. Cost of goods sold was 25% of it. Other expenses like uniforms, staffing, systems, all that, training was 8%. They were under 10%. They were barely making any margin. And that's the best of the best. And that's also them leveraging economies of scales and costs from sites that they have down the road or whatever, or if someone's sick, they use their back of house kind of team to fill in. You don't have any of that, so it's not really going to make money. So for the purpose of this, it's all gone, even if you've got it. Yes, is it frugal to kind of figure out what your costs and stuff are? Absolutely, but if you're at a feasibility perspective right now and you're considering a cafe, what I'm trying to say is don't think of it as it helping move the needle on your profitability, unless it's an experience enhancer. Okay. Now, when we jump into costs, I've broken your operating flex costs into property costs, operational overheads, and projected leasing fees. We're going to go very high level on this today because, again, bringing this bad boy in, this is the costs area here where it gets into an extreme amount of detail for each of those line items, which is necessary if you're going to be setting up a business. But again, if you're just trying to vet your opportunity and be like, is this even worth going into more detail or reaching out to me to do a hypothetical FISO, understanding these are the basics. So your property costs is like your repair and maintenance costs, your building costs, your cleaning, your utilities, your air conditioning, all that kind of stuff. That's relatively low when we look at year one, for example. Your operational costs as we go down, that's your internet, your network security, your Flex software platform. So you're likely going to have to engage a third-party technology partner to help you with your bookings and your billings. And there's lots of great brands out there. If you're interested in me recommending a few, just drop a note in the comments and I'll let you know. And I can even put you in touch with some people if you'd like. And then your overhead costs is the biggest one because you've got 2 full-time on-site staff for this 1,200 square meter site. You've got a center manager, the more expensive one, who's essentially responsible for the P&L of the site and filling the spaces. And then you've got a hybrid role, a community manager / concierge. That's essentially responsible, the face of the business when they first enter the co-working space, and also the tours, the retention, the community activations, that kind of stuff. I see people model for one person in 1,200 square meter sites, destined to fail. That's like too big a space with too little people. And also, even if they could make it work because they leveraged, half of the space to be self-service somehow, which we can get into a bit later, which I advise for really small sites to keep your costs lean. When you've got one person working, it becomes really lonely and they'll quit within a year, especially with this type of business. Don't rely on them making friends with the members and that's their form of, camaraderie. Just think about it yourself. If you had a job and you were alone and you were meant to be running this business, you'd probably quit. The only place that you see it often is in retail and like shopping centers and clothing stores and stuff, but they're not really hell-bent on retaining that casual or that person for potentially 3 years, right? Because retention of your staff is important for your experience because the members want to feel safe, same person, remember names, all that kind of stuff. So it is important, okay? And then your projected lease, and the other crux of that, cost is your marketing, your annual marketing, right? Your digital marketing. What are you budgeting towards that? How are you going to get the word out there? There's lots of channels that you need to optimize to get leads and to convert them. And your projected leasing fees, it's just there as a buffer, could be zero, but it's under the hypothesis that if your center manager and your community manager aren't converting all of your leads alone through the digital marketing that you're doing, but you get third-party leasing agents coming to you because they're also got flex customers and say, hey, I've got 30 desks for you, where's my commission? It's factoring into that. You're just assuming, 20% of the desks I sell, or up to 50%, whatever it is, depending on your market, is going to come through a third-party leasing agent. And this is the commission structure within Flex, which very often isn't huge. It might be like if they sell 12 months through you, they get a month as a commission. So just model for that. And the reason why this is year zero here, it's not showing because it's kind of cut off, but this column here is year zero. Doesn't have to be 140K, but the reason there's about 140K there is because if you are intending to open at 20 to 30% occupancy, so you've got revenue coming through the door, think about it. How are you going to do that without investing any money? You need to pre-hire your staff at least 1 to 2 months. I advise 2 months before opening so that they can also help with the pre-sales and the pre-marketing and the pre-selling. But then your website, your collateral, your content, all that kind of stuff to kind of get it out there. Because you don't have a physical space for anyone to tour, so you need to have like really cool renders of the space. You need to have a really cool brand that talks to people, that makes them want to work from it, right? Much of the time, a lot of the larger brands, they like to build a small suite, like a show suite, very similar to commercial real estate. If they're trying to pre-lease a building, they have a little suite there, right? Now, building outgoings, base rent equivalent, flex management fee. Apologies if you hear power tools. I'm in my garage doing this, and it is the long weekend here in Australia right now. So I think my neighbor's working on something. Good on him. He's a really good bloke. Building outgoings, this is market specific to like Australia and APAC. It's essentially like, what are the costs that the landlord might charge to you as a hypothetical tenant to pay for the lobby, cleaning, all the communal areas of the building, the lifts, all that kind of stuff. There's a cost there, so that's brought forward. And then your base rent equivalent hurdle, for the argument of this is under a management style partnership agreement. If it's just a lease that you're looking to take as an operator, and you just want to re-rent the space and make your margin, you could almost skip all of this and to the bottom because you've got your revenue and your costs, what's left over, how much rent do they want? Okay, I'm taking home the rest. But under a management style agreement, you don't have to pay the full rent. You almost agree to what's half of it or below as a hurdle that we'll agree that we pay first before we start calculating revenue share or profit share. In principle, profit share, because revenue share, you almost want to pay it out at the same time. So then in this case, we've agreed it's 250 per square meter because the gross rent in this scenario I've got down here is 585. So that's how much the owner is looking for per square meter out of this business in terms of their income. Okay, so we're going to say 250 of that comes out. Flex management fee is 8% of the flex revenue. The language flex revenue is important because, again, if for some reason you're putting your food and beverage revenue into this P&L because you're doing it all, which kind of makes sense in theory, just to show your investor or the landlord, when you're negotiating, it has to be flex revenue. It can't be 8% of all revenue because the cafe revenue is going to look huge. And if you just take 8% of that and your co-working revenue, your management fee is going to be way inflated and kill the model. It's going to kill the business. Because remember that cafe revenue it's not making any margins. It might as well just be removed from the model completely. Therefore, you can't be calculating a percentage of that for your management fee. Then profit share, you've got in year 2, 345K left over as profit. Profit share arrangement in this scenario is 90% to the landlord, 10% to the operator. That could look even less for you as an operator. Like you might only get 2% profit share if the owner decides there's no base rent equivalent hurdle required. So they're just like, okay, revenue minus costs equal profit. Let's take a share of that. Because that profit pool is so much larger, since in this scenario, another 300K is being added into it because there's no base rent equivalent hurdle, your percentage is going to go down. Okay, so it's all relative to how you define certain items. So when we look at the total, an important point in this hypothetical asset, let's say their target rent is 585. When you look at the total here, I don't know why that's very annoying. Oh, there we go. It was pegging. It wasn't letting me move it to the left. It might look a bit weird on your screen, but it's fine now. If the rent that they're looking for is 585, that doesn't mean in year 2, year 3, year 4, it's 585. Like, you got to factor in your escalations, which in this model I think I've got as 3.7% because the rent in this scenario is escalating 3.7%. So we've just used that as all costs are escalating by 3.7%. Important point in terms of revenue, as a business owner, this shouldn't just be 3.7% there, at least increase it by 0.5%. You need to be figuring out ways how to increase your desk rates year on year, even if it's by 0.5%, because you're fighting inflation here, right? I've seen many operators be as bullish as increasing it by 1% year on year, but I think that's a bit too aggressive, especially if you want to be conservative with your calculations, okay? So the point I'm making is by year 2, it's no longer 585. The target rent they're looking is 607 and then 629, right? So it's important to factor all of that. And because it's a 1,200 square meter site, so on the smaller side, they're getting from year 2 onwards slightly more than that. So it's a bit of a risk reward thing. But as you get larger towards the 2,000 square meters and higher, they're probably going to be wanting to see, $50 or something like that above the rent that they would normally get if they went down the traditional route. They're like, okay, we're doing this because we want flexibility. It's what people want. But if I'm going to be putting risk into this because it's more of a partnership agreement, I want a bit more reward. Because also under a management agreement, the owner will generally pay for the capital for the space. So what does that payback period look like for them? In this scenario, they're getting a payback, well into year 4, which is good. Because remember, you're also factoring in some sort of ongoing CapEx refreshment. So after you build it every year, how much are you spending per square meter to upgrade, to do things different, to refresh the space? So as you get larger in the site, the payback will look better and better. But generally, as a landlord or investor looking at these things, as long as they get their cash back, that's great. Their payback, they're happy within the year 3, year 4, but there might be other reasons why they're looking at this business. And again, this is a conservative forecast. So if we went bullish and we said, we actually think we could sell these desks for more, we can optimize the meeting rooms, we can sell more in other areas of ancillary revenue because we're behaving entrepreneurially, we can bring our costs down because we're looking into these things. It just gets better. This is just your benchmark model, okay? So hopefully that was helpful. I'll stop there. But if you're interested in reaching out, please do. In the comments, if you'd like to see a US model or something like that, let me know. We'll do the next one there. And please check out the blueprint. if you're serious about setting up a business. So good luck to you. You've got this, and I'll speak to you again soon.